As the two men walked into the house, they found it to be eerily quiet. There was no one in there, after all. Only a baby, which they eventually heard, gurgling and cooing and making all the noises that babies do when left to their own devices. It was as they entered the nursery and saw the crib with the baby inside that the trouble began. It was the priest who noticed that the shadows were not moving the way they ought, that something was flitting amongst them in a way that no candle or trick of the light could explain. And as he pointed it out to his magician friend, the magician cast a spell that just narrowly avoided an attack upon both of them as claws made of absolute darkness reached from the walls through thin air and raked at them. They had not expected this. Creatures of shadow need to be old and powerful in order to physically come into the third dimension. But one as powerful as that would have caused a lot more damage, would have at least instigated a death before they had managed to get to the town. This whole thing was very confusing. And yet the battle raged on. The thing attacked them, tried to get them to step back out of the room. It made high, keening wails that they heard in the back of their mind like a distant memory, or like an echo coming down out of a hallway, and yet achingly loud for all of that. Eventually, a thing occurred that changed everything. In the course of the battle, the two men tried to stray apart, tried to keep from presenting only one target, for the shadow being, as maneuverable as it was still only one being. So it was that the priest knocked against the crib accidentally and knocked it over. All three of them turned their attention to the falling infant, and all three of them reached out, but it was the shadow being that caught it. For she was aiming not for the infant itself, but for its shadow. She held it in her arms, and as she cradled the shadow of the infant itself was arrested in its fall and did not hit the floor. Instead, quick as anything, it was placed back in the cradle, which was set aright again. The two men paused in their strikes. They took a step back and shared a quick glance with each other, and they both, without a word, came to a decision. They had long since practiced their ability to understand each other. One of the men was kinder, the other more curious and clever, and their good traits amplified each other. It might surprise you to know which was which. Eventually, taking advantage of the shadow being's distraction, the magician managed to capture it in a circle that bound it in place. And yet, instead of asking the priest to cast it away, to shatter it into all of its pieces, he asked the priest to bind it instead. And so they did. They connected it with thousands of invisible threads, one shadow to another, until you could not tell the difference between the original two. And they bound it with a gesh to perform an unavoidable task, a task to protect and nurture. And they did not find the resistance as great as they may have expected. And then the house was silent. The next day, the two men left the town, having informed the village headman that they had performed what they came to perform. They collected what payment was due to them, and caretakers for the infant were soon arranged for again and came back to the house. And they found it to be easier than ever before. The infant, though as wailing and as dirty and as prone to mischief as any other infant and then toddler and then child was always taken care of. There was never any tragedies, never any large mistakes made, no matter who it was taking care of the child. No matter how inquisitive or rambunctious or adventurous the child was, no fall ever proved too harmful. No adventure ever had them lost. The child was always cared for, even when she was alone, for she would forevermore have a companion as close to her as her own shadow. The end.